Donald Trump is back, and this time, he's making it clear. His war against the cartels is just getting started.
The country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartel.
After securing his second term as the 47th President of the United States, Trump is doubling down on his hardline immigration policies and aggressive stance against organized crime. One of his biggest promises? Mass deportations.
The president's push for mass deportations has migrants deeply concerned on what is to come. Major cities like Chicago are anticipating massive immigration raids.
Trump has vowed to remove millions of undocumented immigrants, arguing that many of them are linked to cartel activity and violent crime. But his most controversial move is his pledge to use military force against Mexican drug cartels. Trump has openly stated that if necessary, he will deploy U.S. Special Forces to neutralize cartel operations, treating them as terrorist organizations. The bold move may well come to pay horrible dividends. The cartels will only be surprised for a while. Most experts think the cartels will react with increased internecine strife even before Trump takes the oath of office. Some fear that the aggressiveness might trigger a cartel war in which violence, retaliation, and chaos would flare up all along the border. Indeed, Trump believes that cartels must be driven from the US-Mexico boundary if drug trafficking networks and crime are to be dislocated and the pernicious flow of fentanyl would cease into American cities. However, not a single word comes out of El Chapo concerning Trump's plan. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, once the most feared drug lord in the world, is now locked away in a US supermax prison, serving a life sentence. But even behind bars, he hasn't lost his influence or his voice. El Chapo has repeatedly claimed he is being mistreated, subjected to psychological torment, total isolation, and inhumane living conditions. He has even sent direct messages to Trump, accusing the US government of violating his human rights and demanding to be transferred to Mexico for better treatment. But while El Chapo fights for himself, his Sinaloa cartel continues to thrive. Even though he and some of his top leaders, his sons, have been arrested, the cartel remains one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. Trump's war against the cartels won't just be a fight against faceless criminals. It's personal. El Chapo's sons, known as Los Chapitos, are now the key targets. If Trump follows through on his military action, the Sinaloa cartel may hit back harder than ever. This fight is just beginning. Will Trump's military crackdown crush the cartels, or will it ignite a new wave of violence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments as we dive deeper into this explosive story. Trump isn't just talking about border security, he's planning a full-scale offensive. He's called for cartels to be officially labeled as terrorist organizations, a move that would allow the US to take unprecedented military action. He's considering using the US Navy to enforce a naval embargo, cutting off cartel supply routes before drugs even reach American soil. And it doesn't stop there. Trump's strategy includes cyber warfare and covert operations targeting cartel infrastructure, aiming to disrupt their billion-dollar industry from the inside out. His focus is simple: destroy cartel operations, dismantle their leadership, and cut off drug trafficking routes. He's made it clear that the Biden administration has failed to contain the problem, blaming weak policies for the flood of drugs and crime spilling over the border. According to Trump, it's time to take the fight directly to the cartels, and his plans have already sent shockwaves through Mexico's criminal underworld. If Trump follows through, Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, could be in serious trouble. With the cartel's top leaders being hunted, pressure is mounting. Some reports suggest cartel members are already considering negotiations or surrendering to avoid the coming storm. Others, however, are digging in, preparing for war. Trump's policies also mean harsher penalties for drug traffickers and human smugglers. Sentences will be longer, enforcement will be stricter, and options for escape will be limited. This puts El Chapo's family in a dangerous position. With the cartel's influence still strong, will they fight back? Or will they make a deal before Trump's forces close in? One thing is certain, El Chapo's warning wasn't just about prison conditions. It was a message, The cartel is still alive, and they're watching. But as Trump prepares to strike, the real question is, who will make the first move? Venezuela is falling apart at the seams. It has gone bust with hyperinflation and extreme poverty, not to mention a lack of food and medicine, and millions have now fled the country to become one of modern history's greatest refugee crises. But it is not just an economic question. Maduro has made Venezuela a ruled dictatorship. His government is stated to have rigged elections, harassed opposition figures, and silenced critics by way of imprisonments and even disappearances. The streets seethe with rage, and protests are met with violence. Those who dare speak against the evil regime will find themselves disappearing into thin air one night. It has international interests, but is also divided internationally. For Moscow, Beijing, and Ankara, Maduro's government is a strategic ally, even as they shout about human rights. The US, Spain, and most Latin American countries vilify his regime, demanding democratization and further sanctions. Yet there is no movement so far. For Trump, Venezuela isn't just a foreign policy issue. It's a national security threat.
Still barely supporting this failed dictatorship. They are risking their future. They are risking their lives and Venezuela's future.
He has repeatedly labeled Maduro as a dictator, blaming him for turning Venezuela into a hub for crime and corruption. And he's made a bold claim that Maduro is intentionally sending criminals and drug dealers to the US. Trump has considered military intervention in Venezuela before. During his first term, reports surfaced that he had discussed a potential invasion to remove Maduro from power. While nothing came of it then, his return to the White House could bring those discussions back to life. If Trump follows through with his aggressive cartel crackdown, could he also turn his attention to Venezuela? There's also the possibility of diplomatic negotiations. Some believe that despite the tensions, Trump could attempt to strike a deal with Maduro, possibly in exchange for political concessions. But given their history of hostility, that seems like a long shot. One thing is clear. Trump sees Venezuela as part of the problem, and if his war on cartels expands, it could stretch far beyond Mexico. With tensions rising, will Maduro fight back? Or will Trump make his move before Venezuela spirals further out of control? At the center of Venezuela's crime wave is Tren de Aragua, one of the most powerful and violent gangs in South America. What started as a small prison gang has now expanded into a multinational criminal empire, stretching into Colombia, Peru, Chile, and even the United States.
What started as a gang of Venezuelan migrants has now evolved into a Tren de Aragua, now linked to more than 100 police investigations.
Tren de Aragua's operations are brutal. They control drug trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, and illegal mining. But what makes them even more dangerous is their alleged connection to the Venezuelan government. Reports suggest that officials have turned a blind eye to their activities, some even working alongside them. In a country where corruption runs deep, these gangs have become a shadow government, controlling entire regions with violence and fear. For ordinary Venezuelans, this has created a nightmare scenario. Anyone who refuses to comply with the gang's demands risks kidnapping, torture, or death. Families are forced to pay protection fees just to survive, while businesses are under constant threat of extortion. The government's failure to control the violence has only fueled more mass migration, as millions flee the country in search of safety. And this is where Trump sees another problem. He believes these criminal networks aren't just staying in Venezuela. They're expanding into the US as well. His claim that Venezuela is sending criminals into America may sound extreme, but with gangs like Tren de Aragua operating across borders, it's not entirely without merit. The big question now is, will Trump take action against these gangs? His past policies focused heavily on Mexico's cartels, but with Venezuela's criminal networks growing, he might have a new target in his war on organized crime. If Trump views Tren de Aragua as a direct threat, could he push for military intervention or harsher sanctions against Venezuela? For now, the world is watching. The battle against cartels is far from over, and Venezuela's rising criminal empire might be the next big fight. But will Trump be the one to take it on? Or will these gangs continue to grow, fueling crime across the region? The answer could shape the future of America's war on drugs. For Venezuelans, survival is a battle in everyday life. That is how food, medicines, and even electricity have been converted into luxuries in a nation with hyperinflation in the country, making it almost impossible to afford the most basic of needs. Endless queues wait for families outside bakeries, hospitals run out of essential supplies, and whole cities throng in darkness because of rolling blackouts. The already worsening situation is getting a lot more severe with international sanctions, particularly those imposed by the US. Although these restrictive measures are meant to pressure the Maduro regime, they are also deepening the suffering gap of ordinary Venezuelans. Assets are frozen by banks, the trade restrictions cut off imports, and businesses collapse under the weight of economic pressure. Over 7 million are hence forced to leave the country, giving rise to one of the largest refugee crises of modern history. Neighboring countries such as Colombia, Brazil, and Peru are struggling to cope with the influx of refugees, while the United States is debating how to respond. Displacing millions, instability in Venezuela has become an international problem. Some countries like Russia, China, and Turkey still recognize the government of Maduro and consider it a leverage point for countering US influence in Latin America. On the other side, democracy advocates include the US and other European nations, which claim that corruption and crime find fertile ground in the dictatorship ruled by Maduro. Deeply divided, they assume, on the particular way by which the world would settle Venezuela's crisis. Some call for diplomacy, while others warn that such a government as Maduro will never negotiate in good faith. Kind of like Trump, who even considered military intervention in his previous administration to remove Maduro. But then that increased the friction with the powerful allies of Venezuela. One way possible with all strategies is inclusive dialogue between the government and opposition, rebuilding Venezuela's economy, and ensuring a peaceful transition for the cases embedded in gangs, cartels, and corruption. But easier said than done. For Trump, Venezuela is a point of political challenge and opportunity. Will he toughen his stance against Maduro versus focusing primarily on fighting cartels? The future's course, whatever it will be, will have global ramifications. And as the world watches, the people of Venezuela keep suffering, waiting for a solution that may never come. The crisis is still pressing upon Venezuela. Millions of people continue to suffer every day in a country where the government, criminal organizations, and now the economy itself offer them little hope. Inflation soars, resources remain dried up, and violence continues to increase. Many Venezuelans have been displaced, but for those who remain, the dream of a better future is far from realized. This isn't a Venezuelan problem. This is a world problem. It has repercussions for the US and all of Latin America, as well as global superpowers such as China and Russia. Trump's next step is going to be important. Will he step up the pressure on Maduro? What will he do now with respect to gangs and cartels that affect multiple borders? Whatever. Decisions made in Washington aren't just for politicians. They are for real people living in crisis. In times like this, it is easy to give oneself to politics. But at the very heart of it are families trying to survive, children growing up in poverty, and communities dreaming of a future free of fear. The world needs solutions beyond just sanctions and threats. It needs informed empathy. This story is far from over. Will Trump's war on cartels spark more violence, or will it finally bring them down? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.